In the Arctic Circle, the cold doesn't just bite, it shatters. At the Vostok 3 processing plant, 50-year-old engineer Viktor is monitoring a cryogenic pressure valve. He's surrounded by miles of steel pipes carrying liquid nitrogen at -320 degrees. But tonight, a microscopic stress fracture has turned a safety valve into a silent executioner. A white lung leak is flooding the basement, a cloud of pure nitrogen that displaces oxygen instantly. Viktor doesn't smell it. He doesn't see it. He's simply walking into a dead zone where one breath will turn his lungs into ice and his brain into a vacuum. The white lung, the Doberman who sensed the frozen leak. Chapter 1: The Absolute Zero. The Vostok 3 natural gas refinery is a sprawling cathedral of chrome and iron, a labyrinth of pipes and turbines humming in the perpetual twilight of the Arctic Circle. Here, the air doesn't just bite, it shatters. The facility is a masterpiece of extreme engineering, designed to handle cryogenic fluids, liquids so cold they exist at hundreds of degrees below zero. In this environment, a single drop of product on bare skin is an instant, irreversible amputation. Viktor, a veteran engineer with 20 winters of permafrost service under his belt, moved through the facility with a rhythmic, practiced caution. He was draped in a multi-layered thermal suit, a high-tech exoskeleton designed to keep his core temperature at a stable 37 degrees Celsius while the world outside sat at a brutal -50. He felt invincible, protected by a billion-dollar infrastructure of smart grid sensors and automated safety protocols. Beside him trotted Saber, an 80-pound Doberman pinscher with a chest like a suit of armor and ears that twitched at the slightest mechanical disharmony. Saber wasn't a pet, he was a vapor detection specialist, trained to recognize the shimmer, the way light refracts differently through escaping gas. While Viktor watched the digital dials, Saber watched the air itself, his nose constantly sampling the chemical makeup of the room. The lower pipe gallery was a subterranean trench of silver conduits carrying liquid nitrogen at -320 degrees. It is a world of absolute silence, where the only sound is the rhythmic thrum of the turbines. But tonight, a microscopic stress fracture, caused by the constant contraction of the metal, had turned a high-pressure safety valve into a silent executioner. Liquid nitrogen doesn't explode, it simply expands. As it leaks into a room, it turns into a white lung, a cloud of pure nitrogen gas that is heavier than air and completely odorless. It doesn't trigger the smoke detectors, and because it isn't flammable, it doesn't trip the methane sensors. It is the invisible displacement, a ghost that moves through the ventilation shafts with predatory grace. Viktor descended the steel stairs into the gallery, his heavy boots echoing off the grating. He was focused on a pressure gauge that was showing a false positive, unaware that the floor beneath him was already filling with a shimmering, knee-high fog. He was walking into a dead zone, a pocket of space where the oxygen level was dropping from 20% to nearly zero in a matter of seconds. The white lung is particularly lethal because it doesn't cause the suffocation panic associated with carbon dioxide. When you breathe pure nitrogen, your brain doesn't realize it's dying, it simply feels a wave of profound, peaceful exhaustion. It is a lethal sleep, a biological shutdown that happens before the victim can even reach for their emergency mask. Saber stopped at the top of the stairs, his pupils dilating until his eyes were two black voids. He didn't smell a leak in the traditional sense, he felt a change in the atmospheric weight. The Doberman let out a sharp, metallic bark, a warning that cut through the hum of the turbines. But Viktor had already taken his first breath of the frozen vacuum. Chapter 2: The Silent Displacement. The effect of nitrogen asphyxiation is almost instantaneous. As Viktor reached the bottom of the stairs, his vision began to tunnel, the edges of the room turning a soft, blurry grey. He felt a strange sense of digital fatigue, as if his brain was a computer running out of battery. He reached for the handrail, but his fingers, numbed by the plummeting temperature of the gas, failed to find a grip. He slumped against a frozen pipe, his body sliding down into the thickest part of the white lung. His brain, starved of oxygen, began to shut down non-essential systems. He didn't gasp for air, he simply felt a deep, overwhelming desire to rest. The cryogenic cloud was now at his chest level, its extreme cold beginning to crystallize the very moisture in his breath. Inside the gallery, the temperature had dropped to -100 degrees within the localized leak. Viktor's thermal suit, designed for the Arctic wind, was being overwhelmed by the direct contact with the nitrogen fog. His skin began to take on a waxy, translucent blue tint, the frozen pallor that marks the beginning of cryogenic tissue death. He was a statue in a silver tomb. The plant's smart grid remained blissfully unaware of the tragedy. Because the leak was pure nitrogen, a gas already present in the atmosphere, the software interpreted the surge as a ventilation flux. The green lights on the control panel continued to glow, a mocking testament to the limits of human technology. The machines were letting a man die because he didn't fit their error code. Saber didn't need a code. He dove down the stairs, his high-drive focus overriding the primal instinct to stay in the fresh air. As he hit the bottom, the extreme cold bit into his paws, but the Doberman's protective drive was a biological fire. He found Viktor slumped in the corner, his head tilted back, his eyes open but seeing nothing. The dog began to whine, not a cry of fear, but a frantic, high-pitched communication designed to spark a response. He nudged Viktor's face, his warm muzzle a sharp contrast to the frozen skin of the engineer. But there was no hypoxic reflex. Viktor's lungs were still, his heart rate dropping to a faint, irregular thud. He was drifting into the absolute zero. Saber realized that noise wasn't enough. The nitrogen was rising, and the dog's own oxygen supply was beginning to dwindle. He began to feel the dizziness of the gas, his legs shaking as his own blood began to thin. He had maybe 60 seconds before he would join Viktor in this lethal sleep. He had to choose, save himself, or become a deadweight anchor. He chose the grip. Saber moved behind Viktor and grabbed the heavy, reinforced nylon rescue strap from the back of the engineer's tactical vest. This strap was designed for human rescuers to use in a fire, but today, it was the only link between a dying man and the world above. Saber dug his back legs into the steel grating, his muscles bulging under his sleek black coat. Chapter 3: The Atmospheric Sentinel. Dragging a 200-pound man up a 45-degree steel staircase is a feat that defies the laws of canine anatomy. Saber's heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that was the only sound in the freezing gallery. He wasn't just pulling, he was lunging, using his entire body weight as a pendulum to jolt Viktor's body up the first 3 steps. The steel grating of the stairs was slick with flash frost, making every inch a battle for traction. Saber's claws sparked against the metal, the sound like a distant firework in the silent plant. He was breathing the oxygen-richer air near the ceiling, but every time he lunged, he had to dip his head back into the white lung to maintain his grip. His paws were bleeding now, the jagged edges of the non-slip grating tearing at his pads. But a Doberman Pinscher is a high-endurance machine, bred for the long guard. The pain was secondary to the mission. Saber felt the weight of Viktor's body as a personal insult, a challenge from the mountain of steel that he refused to lose. By the 5th step, Saber's lungs were burning. The nitrogen was following them up the stairs like a rising tide. He was losing strength, his muscles beginning to tremble with lactic acid buildup. But then, he felt a vibration in the strap. Viktor's body had let out a sudden, involuntary twitch. It wasn't consciousness, but it was a sign that the oxygen pressure was shifting. Saber let out a low, guttural growl, a sound of pure, unadulterated will. He repositioned his feet, his back arching into a power stance that he had practiced 1,000 times on the training field. With a violent, explosive heave, he dragged Viktor up the final 3 steps and through the pressure-sealed door that led to the observation deck. As they cleared the threshold, the automated air purge system of the deck kicked in, sensing the sudden drop in temperature. A blast of fresh, recirculated air hit them both. Saber collapsed onto his side, his tongue hanging out, his breath coming in ragged, white plumes. He had moved a mountain of dead weight up a vertical gauntlet, and he had won. Viktor lay on the floor, his chest suddenly hitching with a violent, terrifying gasp. This is the gasp reflex. The body's primal attempt to purge the nitrogen and find life. His lungs expanded with a sound like tearing silk, and he began to cough, his body convulsing as the blood finally found the oxygen it had been denied. The engineer opened his eyes to see a blurry world of blinking lights and silver pipes. The first thing he felt wasn't the cold or the pain, it was the warmth of Saber's muzzle pressing against his cheek. He looked at the dog's blooded paws and the shredded vest, and the realization hit him with the force of a tidal wave. That smart grid had failed, but that specialist had remained on duty. Chapter 4: The Frozen Breach. The recovery was a blur of medical teams and thermal regeneration blankets. Viktor was rushed to the infirmary, where he was treated for flash freeze burns and acute hypoxia. The doctors told him that if he had been in the gallery for 30 more seconds, his brain would have suffered permanent ischemic damage. They asked him who had pulled that emergency breach alarm. Viktor looked at Saber, who was sitting on a heated mat in the corner, his paws bandaged by the plant's veterinary tech. The alarm never went off, Viktor whispered, his voice a dry, salt-cracked rasp. The sensors were green the whole time. The only thing that knew I was dying was the dog. The room went silent as the high-tech staff looked at the scarred Doberman. The investigation that followed exposed a massive software blind spot in the Vostok 3 safety protocols. The cryogenic sensors had been programmed to ignore nitrogen fluctuations to prevent nuisance alarms during tank refills. It was a fatal design flaw, a piece of human arrogance that had almost turned $1 million facility into a tomb for its most experienced engineer. Saber became a legend in the Arctic refining community. They didn't see him as a guard dog anymore, they saw him as a biological fail-safe. He was the atmospheric sentinel, the one who could see the invisible and hear the silence. But for Saber, the fame didn't matter. He didn't want the medals or the news cameras, he just wanted to be back on the pipe gallery floor with Viktor. A month later, they returned to the site of the leak. The valve had been replaced, and a new array of oxidrop sensors had been installed, sensors that Saber himself had helped calibrate by marking the air whenever a test leak was simulated. Viktor stood at the top of the stairs, looking down into the silver labyrinth, feeling a phantom chill in his lungs. He looked at Saber, who was sitting at the heel position, his ears pitched forward, his nose already sampling the atmosphere. "Ready, boy?" Viktor asked. Saber didn't bark, he simply looked up at Viktor with an amber gaze that said, "I've got you." They descended the stairs together, a man of the grid and a dog of the scent, moving through the cathedral of iron. The refinery continues to hum in the Arctic night, a beacon of light in the frozen dark. That white lung is gone, but the lesson remains. We build our world on data and algorithms, trusting that smart machines to keep us from the brink. But in the absolute zero, where the code freezes and the lights go green for a dying man, the only true safety is a heart that refuses to stop. Viktor and Saber move through the facility as a pack of two. They don't trust the green lights, and they don't trust the digital dials. They trust the vibration, the shimmer, and the grip. Because as long as the wind blows and the pipes groan, there will always be a sentinel in the frost, ready to breathe for the one who cannot. The cold is invisible, but a dog's loyalty is seen in every heartbeat. If Saber's battle against the white lung moved your soul, help us honor the sentinels of the frost. Smash that like button to salute Saber and every Doberman who stands guard when the machines fail. Subscribe to Paws That Saved Lives, where we bring you the most thrilling and dramatic cinematic legends of nature's heroes. Comment Saber below if you believe a dog's nose is better than any machine.